Hey guys, Blake Hall here. Here today to talk about the notorious final film by Stanley Kubrick, that is Eyes Wide Shut. Now, from the get go, I gotta say, I think this film is absolutely astonishing. This is just one of those rare films that really has the power to deeply enthrall me. And I'm always, every time you rewatch it, you're always in suspense of where exactly the story's gonna go next. And I don't even want to call it a suspense fest in the traditional sense. I would say it's more of like a rich, kind of unsettling mood that the film keeps teasing you. It just keeps throwing all of these like subtle cues that something really dark is lurking beneath the surface. Like you never really, especially being a Kubrick film, you never really feel safe. I think throughout the film, there's something mystical that's really not that's kind of evil that's living in this movie, and that's just something that really drives it. That haunts. That's it leaves it so haunting. Like there's like a lot of like color schemes that repeat themselves throughout the film. They almost have like eerily like patterns that eerily add up to in a way that it seems surreal that it would add up, dreamlike even. You got a color scheme in one scene, and then you got a color scheme in another scene. It's like how is it they add up so tremendously similar? But yeah, so I think that Kubrick. One thing I think that makes this film successful is how Kubrick directs it in such a subtly dreamlike manner. It takes that kind of David Lynch storytelling of surrealism and he makes something slightly more grounded. But also, I'd say it's kind of one of those mystical films that Kubrick made in his entire filmography. Because he's a man that's got a lot of those kind of films, but this one's really it's almost just straight bizarre just by how grounded it is. Actually, I think that this is probably one of the more down to earth films he made, but it also is one of the most mysterious ones too. There's just so much unanswered questions going into this, and when you come out, there's just you always have more questions than you do answers. There's like really gorgeous cinematography in this too. I love the lighting. I mean, the lighting's a little more low key than a lot of Stanley Kubrick, but that's one thing I love about it because I think that really he finds like his films have always been very colorful. Like sometimes it's kind of like you don't even really think about like extreme color with his films, but when you actually watch them, they're layered everywhere. I mean, just very colorful, especially like Space Odyssey, Clockwork Orange. But I think this one kind of refines those extreme colors to a more subtle sense. There's like Christmas lights that'll be lingering around the film. There's a like they go to the bar. I love the way he constructs that kind of lighting. Like it's so colorful, but it always feels necessary to moving the story forward too. Another part that really gets me is whenever the couple, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman are like arguing in their bedroom. It's great how like the lighting, it's very light in the room, but then right behind them it's just like these dark shadowy type of dark shadows, and it really does kind of capture that like light and dark that the film balances back and forth between as far as the lighting. But yeah, really, there's just a few films out there that fascinate me the way this one does. It has a very hypnotic power. It's a very unique kind of power. It definitely leaves you thinking long after the movie ends. I might have to argue it is one of the most unsettling films in Kubrick's filmography. It's up there with The Shining and Clockwork Orange for me, anyways. I think The Shining is really disturbing because you're just watching this man just completely break down. He just doesn't even care to really expose just like his like innermost hatred, and it comes to surface throughout the story. And Clockwork Orange is just a really disturbing portrait of just a youth gone, wild, like to an extreme. But I think what makes this one so haunting is just that it taps into a very personal angle, for anybody really. This is a film that takes you through the dark depths of the things that we're all thinking, but nobody really wants to say. Because there's a point where you say stuff and it's inevitable. It's gonna, it's gonna be harmful that you revealed that much. So I think that this is a film that sort of explores that. It's like just to an extent. What happens especially when you're a couple. What happens when you say a little more than you should have said. It drives. In this case, it drives Tom Cruise stir crazy. He just kind of ends up going on this. Like, yeah, he ends up going on this just nighttime odyssey through the city, which leads him to some really dark situations, really disturbing situations. But the film it's a really hypnotic world this film creates. Every time I rewatch it, I'm immersed right into it. And it's funny because it's set in New York City, but Kubrick actually shot this in London. He had a fear of flying, and he just did not want to leave his home. At that point, his home. But I think that the style works just fine because the whole film to begin with is I think old Kubrick as a filmmaker was often about the power of illusion with filmmaking, and there's like a really subtle fictional aspect to filmmaking. In fact, he had a quote As one of my favorite quotes he said about filmmaking. He says, "I always enjoyed representing a slightly surreal situation in a realistic way. I've always had a penchant for fairy tales, myths, and magical stories. They seem to me to come closer to our present day experience of reality than realistic stories would, because they're just basically stylized anyways." I thought that was a really good quote. There's just really, there's just so many layers in this film you can decipher. It's just one of those films that makes you look at the deepest, darkest depths of a man. There's very few films that capture, everything I love about film so much in the first place. On top of everything else that's so great, I've mentioned already, there's just the visual, aspects that always keeps me coming to it. One of the most aesthetically beautiful films I've ever seen. It's like I said, that very subtle use of colorful lighting. And the shades of light and dark are great. And I say it honestly, the film almost reminds me of like a Michelangelo Antonioni film in a lot of ways. And the way that, because he always presented his stories like kind of in a day of the life manner, but he told day in the life stories in a way that's epic. Like he kind of had like that 70mm filmmaking, going with his films, just like Kubrick does here. I think that Kubrick does absorb some of that Antonioni influence. He really takes it even further. All that potential of that kind of storytelling, and he makes it into something his own that's incredibly massive. But yeah, so I'd say Eyes Wide Shut. It's just it's the filmic mystery of all mysteries. I'd say it's definitely one of the most mysterious films. It's very polarizing. Sometimes still to this day, it's not. It's not a universally praised movie. I mean, some people really despise this film. Part of me's always been like, I can understand that, but I also just, man, I think it's a perfect film just for how mysterious, how deeply dark it gets, just I think the flow of the film is just so hypnotic. It's so subtle. It really is an exploration of just like, you feel like that quote said, it's like you think you feel like you're in reality, but there is that really subtle feeling from what you don't see, rather, but what's implied, that you're sort of in this fictional world. I think that this is, perhaps the most ambiguous film Kubrick made. I would have been awfully curious to see how this would have, panned out had he survived a little longer. I wonder if he would have edited it down anymore. Would he have, made any changes? Was it, because I mean, he like, there's a lot of rumors about how he really felt about the film. Some say he considered it his greatest film contribution to cinema. Some say that he really didn't like this movie. Actually, he thought it was kind of a joke. I don't know about that. I can't imagine thinking that, putting that much time into it. I couldn't even imagine. And I mean, he'd been building up to this one since the '60s. This is a movie he really wanted to make kind of early on into his career. So I don't know. It's hard to say. I personally would imagine this would be one of his favorites. Like I said, I think it does just because I think he would have appreciated just how much more refined this film is than a lot of his others. It does capture that mystique his previous films have, but more subtly. But yeah, no, this is just a dreamlike odyssey, into the dark depths of dark depths. Yeah. So Eyes Wide Shut. If you guys haven't seen it already, I highly, highly recommend it. It's just absolutely brilliant, especially if you loved any other Kubrick films you've seen. It's one of those films it's hard to imagine going wrong with it. If you love a good mystery, a like slow burner, deep seated mystery, then yeah, this is the film to check out, guys. So that's Eyes Wide Shut. Until next time.